Okay, the structure is changing, and if you are within the industry, you may feel a little bit uneasy or even threatened, depending on which part of the industry you're in. But if you are watching it from outside, it is enormously exciting. And the context for the industry becoming critical and important is climate change. You all know that most of you are engineers, so you know that whenever you burn something or use fertilizers or produce electricity or drive a car, you emit carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And the greenhouse gas accumulates in the atmosphere, and it leads to progressive temperature increase. So, greenhouse gas should not give you the impression that it is somehow uh, like the greenery of the Konkan or Kerala and beautiful. It is actually, as you know, I mean, quite dangerous. And in fact, it is critically dangerous now. And so, the context for this industry in general energy is now drastically changing. And from Secretary General of the United Nations Guterres to Modi to many leaders worldwide are now concerned about this. And the fires and the floods and the hurricanes that are happening worldwide are one evidence of this greenhouse gas emissions reaching a critical point in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is the world's commons. You should look up that word commons, COMMONS, if you don't know it already. And the commons don't know any geographic boundaries. So the atmosphere is the commons for all of us, just like the oceans are the commons for all of us. And the greenhouse gases result in heating of the atmosphere and the heating of the oceans. And that creates an unstable environment in which we all now live. So, how to get rid of this, how to ameliorate it? That is the job of changing the energy composition of all countries in the world. So, that is why this industry is so important, because uh, there is no future for humanity if this continues unabated. So I wrote an essay 2, 3 years ago called "Grandchildren Are an Endangered Species," because many young people now are saying that we don't even want to marry, let alone have children, because we can't be responsible for the well-being as generations before us have been for us. So this is a very dangerous situation, and that is why energy is very important. Now, but that is the context which you should keep in mind when you are studying energy or looking at this. Um, when you are graduating with an MBA, I mean, the goal should not be just a job. I mean, you'll always get a job. If you are useful, there's somebody willing to hire you. But the larger purpose of any job you do has to be taken into account. And that is why this subject of energy is very important now. Now, there are some limitations of how to study energy, especially even in a business school. And that limitation is that whether you are in an engineering school or whether you are in a business school or in a trade school or any school, there is no boundary for energy as a subject that encompasses everything that comes under it. For example, you can study polymers, and that can be a part of energy, grappled and come to terms with and figured out how to teach energy in a comprehensive way. So, this is brand new stuff. and you are right in the middle of it. And unknowingly, but my generation is partly responsible for the dilemma that your generation now faces, because we created the greenhouse gases, and my father's and mother's generation created even more of it. And this is so there is no intergenerational justice in the emissions that are now in the commons called atmosphere, and that result in the heating of the oceans that affects everything. So that is the context. So, but in that context, such industries as exist, for example, transport or electricity or cement manufacture or petrochemicals, all these industries now have very fluid boundaries. So there are no clear-cut boundaries of where petrochemicals ends and chemistry and batteries begin and so forth. Okay, so this is a brave new world. I mean, colliding industry boundaries. So it is not easy to answer the question, what business are you in? Now that what business are you in is a very classic strategy question. But probably you folks have not done any classes in strategy yet. But this is a preview of it, you might say. So one of the most difficult questions for anybody to answer who is in the business is, what business are you in? It is not so easy to define what business you are in. So with the merging and colliding of industry boundaries, this is becoming more so. You can't easily say what business you are in. But because of this colliding industry boundaries, new products and services can be conceived, and they have to be produced for the welfare of humanity. And those products and services arise precisely because industry boundaries are merging. Okay. Now, therefore, it throws up entrepreneurial opportunities, and we want all of you to become entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship in a business school is almost a contradiction in terms, because a business school is supposed to produce people who are employees of existing businesses. But when you start creating new businesses, the ball game changes. I mean, it is not cricket anymore. It is cricket and then some. Okay, so you guys are in a privileged position, and you should actually be somewhat skeptical of all the formal curriculum that you go through, because when it deals with entrepreneurship, the ball game has changed. Okay, entrepreneurship is a different animal, and you can say that you're either born or you're not as an entrepreneurial mindset. But it is also true that you can expose yourself and learn about entrepreneurial issues on your own. Okay, so the context I already said: climate change, IPCC report. You have heard, you have read all the news in the newspapers. You should read it actually. This, at least turn the pages of this, or actually go through the web pages of this IPCC report. Okay. Now I have at the bottom right William Nordhaus. He also is a concerned with climate change, and he is an economist. And he got the Nobel Prize maybe 2 years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And he's interested in climate change. You should actually look up the Nobel website and download his presentation he made when he received the prize. And it deals with climate change. So this fellow is seriously concerned with what are the consequences of greenhouse gas leading to climate change. Now, um, the latest issue, actually, BBC had an article um, which I have highlighted here. Actually, URL is here, and you should try and read that also. And a quote that struck me, I have put here as: the young people perceive that they have no future, that humanity is doomed, and that governments are failing to respond adequately. Many feel betrayed, ignored, and abandoned by politicians and adults. The authors say that they are surprised. Actually, they are surprised that governments fail to act knowing all this. So Greta Thunberg, you must have heard of her. She is of this mindset. So the survey was done over 10,000 people, including in India, and the age group is 18 to 24, I think. You should read this. It's a pretty sobering thought, right? So this is the situation you are in. So how will you use energy? And if you have a grasp of energy and manage it well, the dangers will diminish, and you might, a decade at a time, add to humanity's prospects of living on the planet in a healthy fashion. Okay? So that responsibility is now yours, because my generation is already too late. We have created the problems for you, and my parents' generations have created problem for you, and you are now the recipient of that problem. And how will you solve it? Now, so that actually that sobering context we will now put aside for the time being and deal with entrepreneurship and strategy. So Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, 1934 was theory of economic development. Maybe 1942 was capitalism, socialism, democracy, and he coined that phrase "creative destructions." He said that he's called the prophet of innovation. You can read these references later, but I mentioned him already. So his books are worth reading and very insightful. The English is not great. He is an Austrian who writes in English. So, but that's all right. And what he said was that in any industry which is either taking birth or is post maturity, there happens a clustering of innovations. Okay, and this clustering of innovations um, leads to a new industry S curve. Now, you must be familiar with S curves. S curves is the trajectory of how something grows slowly at first, then very rapidly, and then levels off. So, at the early stages of the S curve of an industry, any industry, there are a clustering of innovations, and when entrepreneurs leverage those innovations, they form new firms, and those new firms, some survive, some flourish, some combine with others, and so forth, and that gives rise to a new S curve. So that innovation possibility exists at the early stages of the birth of a new industry, and that is what he theorized. 1930s, 40s, last century. And he says, what does innovation consist of? And many people think that innovation means doing something in the lab, or having an insight when you are sleeping and doing some experiments to do something. He says, yes, that is true too, but really innovation consists of combining things differently, combining things in a way that others have not done before. And when you combine things differently, the outcome is sometimes the birth of a new industry, and which is what we are aiming to have you do, actually. So I'm burdening you with this responsibility. Okay. So you combine things differently, and nobody is a dada, nobody is a boss, nobody is a king. You're all on the same playing field, and age doesn't matter, degrees don't matter, universities don't matter, rural or urban doesn't matter. Nothing matters as long as you are you combining things differently. Now, I'm sorry, but since you have not likely done a course in strategy, you are probably unfamiliar with Porter's five forces model. But take it as self-study and look it up. And the classic Harvard Business School article by him is there. And what he says there is that if you look at an industry that is affected by power of suppliers, power of buyers, the, the threat of substitution, the threat of new entry, and all this leads to rivalry among firms. Okay, so this is what he did many years ago, and this is a very famous model or five forces model. Now it has limitations, but it still holds by and large. And it's a good question to ask: what is the limitation of this, especially as it relates to say energy? But since we haven't done this class on strategy, I will not spend too much time on this and move on. And similarly, if you do a course on strategy, you will come across this PESTLE concept. PESTLE means the forces of the environment are political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And all these forces affect all businesses. So, how do you deal with them? How do you handle them? How do you become effective in the context of these forces? And even as you consider these forces, you look at yourself and say, what are my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? So that is called SWOT analysis. But that also you will do in some later course on business strategy or competition or marketing or something like that. And that is these are useful frameworks to have. I mean, I just brought them in because I want to lay the context for um, the study of the energy industry. And one thing to note here is that if you read business cases from Harvard Business School or wherever, as you study further, most of the business cases are written from the inside out, which is to say that a manager or a CEO or an actor is given the challenge of solving a problem, and that fellow solves the problem in the context of his or her company. Okay? Now, that is the normal way of studying a case in a business school. But Porter is the only guy who says, no, no, let us look at the whole industry and what are the forces that define the options that anybody has within a company from an outside in perspective. So the PESTLE as well as Porter are outside in views, which is to say that they are industry views. But industries until recently were pretty stable. So you could have a static view of many industries. So, for example, you could have a static view of petrochemicals. You know, you take the feedstock, produce various polymers. You can have electricity companies. You know, Maharashtra State Electricity Board, and very stable, almost government-like, stable for hundreds of years. No longer the case. So now what? So this also you should look up the pitfalls of Porter's five forces and PESTLE analysis versus Porter's analysis. So I will move on. I will not spend too much time on this, but you should look them up when you are in front of a laptop and browsing. So now entrepreneurship, as I said, is a consequence of combining things differently. And that involves extraordinary synthesis of forces that are not even defined. Okay, so now Modi is a very big fan of entrepreneurship, so he sponsored and supported Atal Innovation Mission. And this fellow's picture here is the new head of Atal Innovation Mission. The previous head of Atal Innovation Mission was my classmate from my school, but he has now gone back to the Tatas. And this is the new head of entrepreneurship, the Atal Innovation Mission. Look him up. Actually, he's from MIT and quite a curious character. But you see, entrepreneurship is a complicated subject, and so no matter what your background, it's always inadequate. And if you look at the biographies of all the famous entrepreneurs, from Steve Jobs to Elon Musk to Jeff Bezos, I mean, they are their own people. I mean, they are not bound by social givens. But we'll come to that later. So once again, you haven't done this class on strategy. So what business are you in is a difficult question, as I said before. So if you are in the energy business, a unit is of course a kilowatt hour, right? So are you in the kilowatt hour electricity generation business? Are you in the moving cars through electricity transport business? Are you in the petroleum business for moving a car? Or are you in the coal-fired electricity business? This is a question you have to ask and say, well, I am in none of them, or I am in some of them. But then under kilowatt hours can get quite complicated. Now, why is that called a unit? I mean, why is there the kilowatt hour next to that electricity? And Walt Patterson said long ago, and he's my guru actually. He's a wonderful man. He lives in London and he works for Chatham House. He's in his 80s, I think. I met him and had lunch with him in London once. He's a wonderful, wonderful, insightful man, and you should look up his website. His articles are fantastic. They will give you a new perspective on energy industry. He's a Canadian guy living in London. So what he said was, we don't need electricity. We need the users of electricity. All right, now that's a big sentence. You'll have to meditate on it for a long time. Okay, we don't need electricity. We need the users of electricity. So if you ask my mother, so how many kilowatt hours do you want? She would not know what I'm asking her about. Okay. But if she says I need the temperature of the air conditioner to go down, then that makes sense to her. Or she says I need more light. Now that makes sense to her. So that is what Walt Patterson is saying. We need the uses of electricity, not electricity in kilowatt hours per se. So then what do you measure and what do you sell? I mean, that makes the whole electricity business, not your father's or grandfather's electricity business. It's a completely new animal now. Can you sell liters of water pumped? Why should you sell kilowatt hours? So, I mean, now Reliance is getting into this. And what would Reliance say? What business am I in? I mean, Reliance Petrochemical Company began as a fiber company, began as a textile company. What will Shell Oil say? What will Exxon say? What will Indian Oil say? What business am I in? Not very easy to answer anymore. And because this whole thing is now topsy-turvy and splintered, the entrepreneurial opportunities are numerous. So the question for you is, what will you pursue? Where does your heart lie? And that's the main question here. It is not, can I look at something objectively and say that this has a net present value of so much, and so this is more attractive than that, so let me do that. It doesn't work that way. It works with what your heart tells you. Actually, if you look at Elon Musk, I mean, he always goes by what his heart tells him. He is not doing the math of net present value, of break even in a financial spreadsheet sense. He will delegate that to some MBA from Harvard. Okay. But anyway, so now both Reliance and Adani have got into this new energy business. And Reliance made the announcement maybe a few weeks ago, and Adani made the announcement yesterday. Reliance said, I will invest $10 billion in a giga complex in Jamnagar. And yesterday, Gautam Adani says, I will double your 10 billion to 20 billion and get into the energy business of the future. So this is all very exciting. You should read this up and say, what are they trying to do? And that's a big question. What are they trying to do? And I'm glad they're doing it, because you can't expect this kind of initiative to come up from the public sector energy companies that dominate India's energy landscape. I mean, this kind of thinking will never happen at Maharashtra State Electricity Board. Okay, this will never happen with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. This will never happen with the Ministry of Power. I mean, this is not government stuff, though energy business has been government run. And that is a big problem. We'll come to that in a minute. So the new energy is extremely exciting, and I say so for these reasons. Once upon a time, it was believed that electricity is a natural monopoly. You should look at what it means, a natural monopoly. Now, there is no such thing anymore for electricity. So, natural monopoly is dead. Once upon a time, it was believed that to diminish the price of kilowatt hour or per unit of electricity, you need giant scale. So, you have these major coal burning power plants of gigawatt capacity all over the country. No longer needed. Your rooftop solar can produce cheap electricity cheaper than a coal-based gigawatt scale power plant. So now what does it do to these giant gigawatt scale power plants dotting the country with coal mined from Dhanbad and so forth? So the answer is they're dead. Now, the other thing to remember also is that there are no barriers to entry. You can be in the electricity business as an individual. You don't need somebody's permission. You don't need government to tell you whether you can get into energy business or not. You can be, I mean, you can decide tomorrow, I will buy a 200 watt solar panels and create lighting for my apartment. End of story. You don't have to ask any permissions. You can do it. And there are no network effects in electricity, though electricity is a grid, which means a network, but it is not the same as telecom. Telecom has increasing returns to scale as the size of the network and the number of participants in it increases. But that's not true of electricity. Electricity networks, the grid as it exists, the benefits of more customers joining that grid are arithmetical or just additive. There is no increasing returns to scale like telecommunications. Say, I don't know if this point is clear or not, but let me explain this way. So, suppose some African country has created a telephone network for the first time, and some villager gets a telephone. You know that villager can call Gautam Adani or Prime Minister Modi from the middle of Africa. So that gives that rural African enormous power. And from your mobile phone, you can call President Obama or President Biden. So that is enormous power also. Okay, you can send a message using internet to Secretary General of the United Nations. How powerful is that? There's nothing comparably powerful with the electricity network. So it's an important, interesting question to ask. I mean, why is there a grid in the first place? That will take us to another 2-3 hours of lecture. So we will skip that and you can explore it on your own. Why do you have the grid at all? So Walt Patterson, whom I mentioned in the previous slide, he created a construct called infrastructure electricity. And infrastructure electricity is like a window on your house. Do you pay for the window on your house? No. Do you pay for the roof on your house? You pay one capital cost, that's all, but you don't pay every month. So he says electricity of the future is like that. It is infrastructure electricity. There is no fuel burning rate. Therefore, there is nothing to pay per month like we do today. I mean, how many units did you consume? And therefore, you pay me so much. That era is gone. If you put a solar panel, actually, I did that in my apartment in New Delhi. I put a little solar panel and had a light burning in the apartment. It had a battery in it. So the battery used to charge all day. And the light in my apartment from my little battery operated lamp was for all night. And I didn't pay a thing. I just, so infrastructure electricity is free after you pay for the solar panel and battery and bulb. So this is a brave new different world than the world of units of power and paying so many rupees per month kind of a thing. So you should explore this. Now, the in United States for sure, but also in India, the electric companies are a powerful political force. They they pay politicians for the elections in the US. They lobby the the equivalent of MLAs, the congressmen in the US, and they don't want their comfortable living right now as an electric utility to be upset by this newfangled solar and battery thing. And they are successful because they have money and they are monopolies. Maharashtra State Electricity Board has no competition. Okay, so if you have no competition, then you're king of the world. And so they're using that power to affect the new emerging possibilities of energy. Okay, so I mean, you can ask me questions about any of this at any time, but I'm just laying you the big picture as quickly as I can. So now, if you consider this macro picture of climate change, energy industry, transport, as well as electricity, and the industry structure of that industry for 100 years stable, and now suddenly under threat because of solar plus batteries. And then you say, oh my God, now what do you do? And in this are entrepreneurial opportunities. I will list some of them. Okay. One of them, this is, I was at IIM Kozhikode as a professor, as a visiting professor. And when I was there, we said, we should light up this pathway that goes from the top of the hill to a cafe. And in Kerala, there's so much rain, so much greenery, that there are snakes and scorpions on this ladder, on this stairwell. So after when daylight goes out, nobody goes on this. So now I said, no, this is not good. So we should light up this with the solar panels and batteries. So which we did. And so now this pathway is lit up. So we are using electricity for lighting where there is no grid. There is no state government's electricity network. So you can see in the middle picture is the solar panels, and below that is a battery box. The battery box is the same as your backpack, not a big deal, tiny thing. But it lights up maybe a few 100 feet of pathway. Do you know how much each bulb in each of these is? 8 watts. I mean, 8 watts, that's all. And it's enough to light up that pathway brightly. Then the power goes off at night and the entire campus goes dark because Kerala State Electricity Board has lost power. This beautiful pathway is brightly lit. It's an amazing thing to watch. Okay? So now the question for you is, can you create a business out of this? Can you scale this? Where should the market for this be? These are business questions. Similarly, there is a company, I think this is near Pune itself. called EcoZen. They have created solar-powered cold storage, and they sell this box to farmers so that after the harvesting is done and you put the palak or methi or whatever, you don't have to rush it to the market. You can keep it in this, and then you can time when you go to the market when the prices are right. So, of course, there's no grid here. So, this is all solar power. So, cold storage is another business. Pumping is another business. Okay. So, don't ask me questions like, is this a DC motor or AC motor? I mean, we'll pass that kind of engineering questions later. But let's say this is a submersible DC motor. So it pumps water, and that's all you want. Solar power. No grid electricity from state electricity board needed. So is this a business? Here's a question for you. Can you link 1,000 of such pumps in a district using IoT? And if you link them using Internet of Things, can you create a business for managing those 1,000 pumps? So how do you do that? How do you write a business plan for doing that? That's the question for you as entrepreneurs. Now, there's another use of electricity, solar, agriculture. It is called agrivoltaics or agro PV. And the diagram on the right hand side is something my student did. He was trying to calculate how much is the yield affected of crops that are growing in the shadow of these solar panels. And so he did that math, and he says I can live with that. So if you space out the solar panels widely enough, sunlight will penetrate enough so that the yield loss is not that great. Okay, so when people deploy acres and acres of solar panels on land, it bothers me because you can do this and you don't need to waste that land that way. And my student also did things like this. He conceived of a system like the bottom left here, and he said, I must have space on the sides so that I can roll a tractor through the sides of it without affecting the solar panels. So you can run a tractor and do whatever farming you need to do without affecting the solar panels. Is this a business you want to get in? You could. So this is a very interesting business. Now EV, everybody talks about EV, and I don't know why they talk about EV for cars. Electric vehicle can be two-wheelers. It can be an auto. It can be a rickshaw. That is what India should focus on, the two-wheelers and rickshaws. And they should not charge those batteries using the grid. They should charge them using solar panels. Okay? And this is happening, but not fast enough because there are many issues. I mean, who owns these solar panels if you're charging a bicycle on it? Are they public service or private on your rooftop at home? So these kind of issues have to be solved. So is this a business you want to get in? You could. Refrigeration. Why do you need electricity for refrigeration? In the lab I was running at New Delhi, we had a refrigerator running on solar power, DC. I have that picture somewhere. But if this is the case, then why do you need grid power? You don't need grid. You're independent of the grid. And this is my particular interest. Electricity for cooking. We did this trial in my neighbor's backyard in where I live in San Diego. He's an entrepreneur with solar power for water heating. So he had these panels, and so he read my article on cooking, and he called me and said, "Let's meet." So when we went to the in his backyard, he took two wires from the solar panels and fed them to this resistive cooktop on the left hand side, and we boiled water the first time. Then he called me a month later and said, "I have a more sophisticated solution." And he says, "If you bring vegetables, we can cook a meal in my backyard," which we did. So imagine that: no fire, no fuel, no electricity bill. Uh, and we had a meal for 5 people cooked in his backyard. So if this is the case, then why do you need the 14.2 kilograms red colored gas cylinder in every kitchen? When it runs out, you shake it and say, I have 2 days worth left, and call, and somebody comes and delivers it, and you pay 850 rupees for it. This is free. So I'm very fond of this. So we can talk more about this later. We can talk a lot about this. But I have deeply studied this for at least 2-3 years now. So just to recap, these kinds of opportunities, and I've listed more here, are potential businesses for you. I mean, you can have a business of solar powered drying of wet papad. You see, you make papad and you want to dry it before you put it in a ledger packet. So you can dry it with solar power. You don't have to wait for 2 hours for it to dry and then put it. You can do it in 10 minutes. Your cafe coffee day machine can run on solar power. Air conditioners can run on solar power. Washing machines can run on solar power. So many business possibilities. What will you do? So anyway, we did cooking. We made a pitch, and we were winners. Actually, we were finalists for a competition by this company, which is a French multinational. They wanted to do solar powered cooking in Africa. So we proposed a solution, and we were finalists. And I ran this laboratory called CREST, Center for Renewable Energy Systems and Technologies. And we had maybe a dozen appliances running on solar power. And we invited all kinds of people to drink tea made with solar power. So we actually made tea and distributed it to whoever came to visit us. Now this one, let's see, since I'm using PowerPoint, this is actually in Pune, and I was very impressed that this exists in Pune. And if I can relay this, you will see. Do you know where this building is, guys?
Is it Kothurud?
Sorry, sir, but I am unable to hear the audio.
Yeah, while sharing the enable button has to be.
I will send it to you.
Yeah.
How do I send it right now? I don't know, but I will send it by email.
Yeah. You have to optimize the audio button while sharing.
Oh,
Then
can you not hear it?
No.
I see. So, but you get the idea that there is
Yes.
some building in Pune that is doing this.
Yeah. I think it's in Kothurud.
Okay. Oh, this is in Kothurud?
I suppose, yes. Looking at the surrounding, it's in Kothurud.
I see.
Hadapsar, okay.
Yes, I have searched the society name.
Oh, all right. Great, Sudhir.
I see. Actually, I also don't know where this is. So if you let me know, that would be great.
Okay.
So anyway, the point is that they are doing pretty innovative things there.
Yes.
Now, let me go back to full screen again, if I can. Okay. So these are my partners in San Diego, and we are doing cooking. This is a pressure cooker from Prestige from my wife's kitchen. And this is the inverter plus lithium ion battery which we use to do the meals in his backyard. And we had a wonderful meal for 5 people. Okay. Then this is Dr. Barry Butler, and he's the one who's solar for hot water. He's 78 or so years old now, so he's kind of retired. And this is, I'm doing the stir fry dal. As you can see, this is the battery plus inverter. And then when we published our results in a press release, I became famous in these circles. So the United Nations was organizing a World Environment Day function at Bikram Bhavan. So they called me to ask if I would show what we are doing at that exhibition. And they told me when I went there that Modi is going to come. And Modi did come. And he spent quite a bit of time with me understanding how we are using solar panels and induction cookers for cooking. So it was quite a day for us. And so now we are trying to do something more complicated. I'll show it to you in this diagram. So this is what we want to do, and your ideas are welcome. So what I want to do, since the standalone cooking system works, I want to link at least 16 apartments to a cooking system. And we will do the cabling and solar panels and offer it as a part of the apartment amenities for a new building. And this we haven't done yet, meaning that we have done 4 or 5 demos of single unit cooking, but we haven't done a multi-apartment system yet. So this is my next effort to create a multi-apartment cooking system for high rises. Doesn't have to be a high rise, but any aggregation of apartments. So actually we are nearly running out of time. So you have the presentations anyhow. So I want to just give you a big picture right now of 2 revolutions in energy. One is called the applications we talked about, pumping, cooling, lighting, cooking, and so forth. And the other is called microgrids. So the output of a microgrid is electricity. But microgrids are small. They are between 0.5 to 5 megawatts. Okay. But they talk to each other. And my view is that a microgrid is infrastructure of electricity for the future. because they have solar panels and batteries and control systems. And this is what I wrote my book about, Federation of Microgrids. So the revolution in electricity is for the reasons listed as groundswell force on the left-hand side. And one is microgrids and a federation of microgrids. And the other is application-specific microgrids, which means cooking, heating, refrigeration, pumping, and so forth. So you can have the bottom part, application-specific uses as opportunities or microgrid as opportunities. Have your pick. You can convert your COEP campus into a microgrid. And I suspect that COEP campus as a microgrid will be less than 5 megawatts. Okay. So it can be less than 5 megawatts. You guys can design it and sell it to the management. And Professor Ahuja will be happy to entertain your analysis. And I will support you. And we will go to, ideally not government of Maharashtra, but somebody like my friend at Persistent and say, hey, lend us some money. And for him, it will be minor. So he'll just lend it to us. You can develop a microgrid for COEP. Okay. So you'll have to do the calculations. How many solar panels, how much battery, what is the load profile of the campus? Is there a drop in load on weekends? Is there a drop in load during holidays? What happens when you don't have the air conditioners on during cold season? And all these kinds of questions you'll have to answer. And write a proposal, and I'll help you sell it if you want me. Okay. So that's the microgrid part. And I have the microgrids can be quite complicated. I mean, you can have this building in Noida as a microgrid. This will be maybe 25 megawatts. And then on a map, I've listed the microgrid locations. And in the United States, there is a restaurant chain called Chick-fil-A, which is a chicken restaurant chain. They have decided to create every store as a microgrid. So you can say the big bazaar in Pune can be a microgrid. Your college is already a microgrid. Every school which has a campus can be a microgrid. Okay? Ferguson College can be a microgrid. And so every office building, Persistent can be half a dozen microgrids. You get the idea. Every housing society, like that building you saw, can be a microgrid. They haven't done it in that building, but it can be. See, this is Chick-fil-A. This is now a microgrid. It will be less than 0.5 megawatts. It's like 0.2 megawatts, if that, maybe less. This is a very complicated picture, but you can look at it later. But this will take us into a different path, where one microgrid sells power to another microgrid and buys power from an adjacent microgrid. Okay. So, but this will take us to a complicated discussion. You can think about it and you can ask me questions by email. I had proposed a conference on microgrids, international conference. I wanted Greta Thunberg to inaugurate it. Anyway, but COVID came in the way. Now, microgrid is becoming hot. So there are VCs who are funding microgrids and companies who are deploying microgrids. You can start a company to deploy microgrids. Use COEP as a pilot. So I've said this before, you can have electricity for applications or you can have microgrids. And I'm interested in both entrepreneurship and microgrids. Both are my books. My entrepreneurship book is right after my PhD. It's very old. The microgrid revolution book was 2016, December, so it's actually 2017. It's too expensive. But anyway, so this is my last slide. Okay, so how are we doing with time? So sorry I had to rush the last few ones. You haven't even interrupted me with one question yet. You'll get the chance.
We
Now,
have it
microgrids
scheduled
are-
post your talk, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So these are India issues that I want you to consider. That there is a conference on microgrids held internationally in different venues around the world. Nothing has happened in India. So the question is why? So the last microgrid symposium conference I attended was in an Eastern European country, and it was in Bucharest. Bucharest, Romania. So that's where they're holding microgrid conferences, but not a single one in India. How come? You must correct them. As I said before, energy as a subject is cross-disciplinary, and it is not there in any university, any IIT, any IIT. How come? Now, it is not good enough to say information and communication technologies. You must include transport and electricity in it as well. But where do you study it? No university department has any of this. Worldwide, even Harvard doesn't know how to organize energy subject in the business school. So let alone all the rest. So IIMs are nowhere. I wrote to the director of IIM Bangalore saying, why don't you start an energy center? He says, we have already too many centers. He says, we can't start one. I said, nuts. So there will be pollution in Bangalore and everybody will die. So India will be disproportionately affected by climate change. I said that in the beginning, and this is true. And I have written an essay called Grandchildren Are an Endangered Species. So now you are in your 20s, and you have to think about this. Should I get married? Should I have children? Where will they live? What will they breathe? Now, India mocks Greta Thunberg. I don't understand it. Why? And she has raised the issue in global consciousness. But why does India mock Greta Thunberg? I don't understand it. So, how do you deal with the public sector electricity companies and oil and gas companies? ONGC, do you need them? Or Power Grid Corporation of India. Who needs grid? Power grid. Who needs NTPC? Thermal power. So my advice is split them up and privatize them. Do what Adani and Ambani are doing, multiply it 10 times. And those remaining 10 times guys are you. So you do that. The last point I'll make, and then we'll stop. In India, there is a cultural issue, which to me is a big deal issue. And that cultural issue is this, that if you double click on any Indian, I'm generalizing, but if you double click on any Indian, what do you get in the drop down box? What you get in the drop down box is a socially defined person. Okay, socially defined means I'm great because I went to IIT. I'm great because my father is so and so. I'm great because my title is so and so. I'm great because I'm a Brahmin. I'm great because I'm a Patel. I'm great because I'm ABC. But if you really say, but who are you? There's nobody there. Okay, if you double click on a fellow, who is this person? That fellow is not there. So the definition of who is an Indian is socially constructed. And if you are a socially constructed individual, it is very hard to become an entrepreneur. Because an entrepreneur is an individual independent of all the social definitions. So, so this is a very important final point I wanted to make. So I thank you for being patient. You haven't asked me a question. Thank you for being patient listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I thank you from the behalf of the class for your wise words. I hope they will help us definitely help us in our future. So now we are open for questions. If anyone has some questions, you may ask the sir.
Uh, Hello, sir. Good morning.
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
Shashank on this side. So, sir, basically, I